Well, this is a sort of appendix to the story of John James Tayler, sort of part 13, because there is also a letter written by J.J. Tayler to John Kenrick from Geresh on the 3rd of September 1868. John Kenrick was his tutor. He was a scholar also at Manchester College, and John James Tayler writes to him on the 3rd of September 1868. I feel that I ought not to let my visit to this interesting country terminate without writing a few lines to one of my oldest surviving friends. We are here most hospitably entertained in the country residence of one of your former pupils, Mr. John Paget, who retains in undiminished strength his attachment to his old faith and his old fellow students, and revives with a heartiness that does one's heart good in this land of strangers his recollections of York and old York days. By an act of the Diet he's been invested with the privileges of a Transylvanian nobleman, and married, as you perhaps know, a baroness in her own right of one of the oldest families in the country, who claim descent from a former palatine of Hungary. All his connections, I find, are with persons of that rank, and though he's always staunchly struggled and even suffered personally for Hungarian rights, as opposed to the crushing centralization of the House of Habsburg, yet his views of politics, I can perceive, are those of persons of his own class, and correspond very much to what we should call in England High Whiggism. He has no love of Kossuth and his adherents, who he thinks misunderstood the true interest of their country. Indeed, among the Unitarians with whom I have so far conversed, I find the conviction decided that Hungary, though preserving her rights as an independent kingdom, cannot afford to separate herself from Austria, any more than Austria can do without Hungary, which is her right arm of strength. The Hungarian patriots are intensely sensitive to the distinction between King of Hungary and Emperor of Austria. To the former they are enthusiastically loyal. The authority of the latter, as such, they refuse in any sense to acknowledge. I met with a curious example of this feeling the other day at Budapest. I asked a gentleman who was passing me on the bridge if the large building on the height opposite was der Kaiserliche Palast. He turned sharp upon me with, "Wir haben keinen Kaiser. Das ist der Königliche Palast." On my telling him that I was an Englishman and very sorry for my mistake, and that we in England had always had the warmest sympathies with Hungary, he held out his hand to me with the utmost cordiality and added with a smile, "Ich bin ein schlechter Deutscher." This enthusiastic patriotism has given new impulse to the cultivation of the Magyar language. I believe German is less generally spoken, Latin certainly, than before the revolution of 1848. Madame Paget told me that for 12 years, out of pure patriotism, she never allowed a German word to escape her lips. The men too have taken zealously to the Hungarian dress, which is very becoming. Braided coats and trousers, and Hessian boots, often with spurs. The ladies seem to me to dress very much the same all the world over, which I greatly regret, as the national costume is often far more graceful and picturesque than Parisian modes. We see it still among the peasant women, especially the Wallacks. Madame Paget is exceedingly hospitable and kind, but you feel that she is Frau Baronin. She and my daughter get on exceedingly well together. I must now give you some account of the special object of my coming into this remote country. Although fuller details I must reserve for the longer narrative, which I have promised Charles Beard for the Theological Review. The Danube, which we descended in a steamer stopping in Vienna 2 days, from Linz to Budapest, a little disappointed us. We did not think it equal to the Rhine, nor to the upper part of the Danube itself, which some years before we had ascended from Linz to Regensburg. In its lower course it flows through immense tracts of dead level, but the weather was very unfavourable, and we could perhaps hardly judge. Everything was new to us. A railroad took us in tolerable comfort, with much roughness and tumult at the different stations, where we had to change carriages, to Großwardein, where we found a clean and comfortable hotel, and where the magic of Mr. Paget's name, who has an estate in the neighbourhood, procured us at once excellent chambers. We travelled by voiture in 2 days from Großwardein to Klausenberg. This was rather more expensive, but it saved us a fatiguing journey by night in a close, uncomfortable Postwagen, and enabled us to see the country, which for a great part of the way is very beautiful. We had now entered a district inhabited by a Wallack peasantry. Their appearance struck us as exceedingly wild, almost savage, sharp, aquiline features with a somewhat fierce expression, with long black hair hanging in masses over their shoulders. There is, however, notwithstanding that they have only just emerged from a kind of serfdom, a certain dignity in their gait and bearing, and the women especially, with their naked legs and feet and their broad contrasted masses of drapery, step with a kind of natural grace and look exceedingly picturesque when seen from some distance. Their cottages furnish capital subjects for the pencil, but I should feel some hesitation in entering them. A sort of rude veranda runs round one side of them, and in the huge overhanging mass of thatch a single hole is left for the escape of the smoke. We travelled on the whole very comfortably and got good wholesome food. One night alone we had to rough it a little, as there was only one chamber at liberty, and my daughter and I had to stretch ourselves without undressing on the 2 beds in a close, uncomfortable room. The fresh morning air, when we started again, was perfectly delicious. Soon after our arrival at Klausenberg, Benxady, a former pupil, and Monsieur Ferenc, the head pastor of the church in Klausenberg, whom I had known formerly in England, waited on us. They had been looking for us at another hotel, where we'd been expected, and where they had kindly ordered dinners. They were soon joined by the Bishop Kritza, a man of most engaging manners and appearance, with something of an oriental expression in his dark features, simple as a child, of the broadest Catholicism, full of enthusiasm for his own favourite pursuits, which are linguistic and antiquarian, relating more particularly to the popular poetry and legends of the Magyar race, on which subject he has lately published a large volume in Hungarian, showing, I am told, very great research. He and his wife are settlers, who claim to be the oldest and most genuine portion of the Magyar race. In spite of his great simplicity, he has a natural dignity of bearing which strikes one at once. We slept that night at the hotel, arrangements having been made for our going on the afternoon of the next day to Gieres, the country seat of Mr. Paget, which is 25 miles from Klausenberg and 5 from Torda, the scene of the approaching celebration which we passed through in reaching it. The following morning we spent in seeing the church, college and library of the Unitarians. Klausenberg surprised me by its neat and clean and civilized appearance. It is well paved and has some very good shops, a casino and a very handsome theatre. It is the winter residence of the Transylvanian gentry and nobility. We dined at the bishop's at 1 o'clock before starting for Gieres. His wife is an unaffected, ladylike woman, a very mother, they say, to the youths in the college and gymnasium. We dined with the bishop's family and several gentlemen connected with the church and the college. Everything was perfectly simple, but profusely hospitable, and in excellent good taste, arranged and prepared by the Bishop's lady herself. Not, of course, quite in the style of Lambeth, but nowhere, I'm sure, could there have prevailed a kinder and better feeling, or have been a more cordial episcopal welcome. We are going to Klausenberg again for a day or two at the end of this week to see things more leisurely and to obtain some more particular information. I must reserve for the pages of the Theological a fuller account of the festivities which occupied the 2 last days of the month. They commence with a public reception of the Bishop from Klausenberg on Saturday afternoon. Mr. Paget kindly drove us over to Torda to see it and to pay some calls of ceremony. But from having misinformed us to the hour, the procession was over when we arrived. The next morning I was introduced to the consistorium, of which I was told that I had been previously chosen an honorary member. Then followed the service, when Monsieur Ferenc preached with a capital manner and delivery, and the sermon, I am told, was excellent. I myself heard expressions of admiration at its spirit from all parties, Calvinists and Catholics, among others from the Lord Lieutenant of the county, Baron Kenrick. I joined with Mr. Paget in the celebration of the Lord's Supper which followed. It was touching and impressive, but I must reserve my description of it for another occasion. There was an adjourned meeting of the consistory in the evening, which I briefly acknowledged in Latin, the honour of being admitted one of their members, and presented the addresses from the Unitarian Association and the West Riding Society. The next day there was an ordination service, when Simen, one of our former pupils, preached, and 13 young men were set apart by laying on of hands for the ministry. This I must describe hereafter. After each service on the Sunday and the Monday, there was a public dinner, attended by all denominations, at which my own and my daughter's health were cordially proposed and received, and I acknowledge in the best German I could command a very kind and hospitable reception, and expressed my own sympathy and that of the Unitarians in England, and concluded on one occasion with proposing the health of Bishop Kreutzer and the Transylvanian Unitarians, and on the other that of Mr. Paget, as a standing pledge of the friendship and sympathy that should unite England and Hungary. A ball concluded the ceremonies of each day, from which, however, we were kindly permitted to absent ourselves. And here ends John James Taylor's letter to his friend, Reverend John Kenrick. Thank you for watching.